Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a December 19th edition of the MSP Initiative, MSP Talk, and just some quick housekeeping we get out of the way at the beginning of these sessions. And, we'll see where the call takes us. Never a dull moment. MSPinitiative.com. Everything that we do as MSP Initiative is here. The session itself is being recorded. It will be here in both podcast and video format at mspinitiative.com under sessions. So we are in your podcatchers, but these are on YouTube. You can go straight to sessions and just go wild. We have two, not one, but two MSP community minds next year. One's in Nashville, one's in Denver. So the Nashville one's going to be April 17th and 18th. The Denver one's going to be July 25th, 24th, 25th. We really are following up after our inaugural one in Denver earlier in 2023. Totally a different blueprint than a lot of events you've been to. MSP panels, actual workshops. This is not vendor driven. The vendors are actually in these sessions with you, learning side by side with you. Here's a wrinkle. And so ultimately, we love this format, and we're going to try it again a couple times next year. Please join us. Again, if you're an MSP, it costs you absolutely nothing to register. There's no $3.99, $4.99, $9.99 special. It's $0 for you to attend. But we definitely need you to get there. That's the only thing that's going to cost you a little bit of money. And then, of course, this year, let's not forget that we do a lot of these block parties, right? We did 6 of them this year, both in Europe, combination of Europe and the U.S. Next year will be Europe, the U.S., and probably one down in Australia as well. Our big one that closes out the year is always in Orlando around IT Nation. 2 years ago, we had All American Rejects. Last year, we had this year we had Better Than Ezra, Sugar Ray, and Tonic as a group. That was awesome. We love these. Totally about the community. They're for you. Stay tuned. Totally plan plenty of these for next year. You will not be dissatisfied. We have some community offers. These are just companies from around the sandbox that are offering you deals. So if they're good for you, take them. Industry calendar. I know my friend Jen is going to get the 2024 dates loaded up here in our online calendar as we're coming here to the end of December. We got, I think there's like 320 something events for next year. Not ones that we're running, just across the industry. Yeah, there's really that many. And choose wisely, right? Like you can't be out of the office every week of every month. That's obvious, but some people really try. That is all of the housekeeping. MSPinitiative.com. Today's guests are very good friends from Msp-Ignite. We have Steve and Chris joining us. It's been a little while. I've seen you out there, Steve, floating around. Lots of dinner pictures out there. But how are you doing? And I would love to, kind of zoom out, right? You guys talk to a lot of MSPs throughout the year, right? I mean, we'll talk about what you guys do in a second, but love to understand now 12 months into another around the sun, vibe. Where do things stand, like in MSP land? I'm sure you could give us a pretty good idea based on all those conversations.
Thanks, George. Yeah, there are way too many dinners I'm attending these days, but those dinners are after a nice meeting with our peer group members each and every time, so it's pretty cool. And yes, I do talk to a lot of MSPs day in and day out. It's really what we do. It's really what we focus on. Obviously, this year, the big conversation, both on the MSP side and the vendor side, has been M&A. I say that somewhat tongue-in-cheek because, quite honestly, it's been that way for most of the last 10 years. That's the truth. I'd say more on the MSP side the last 2 years or 3 years than ever before. And that presents interesting challenges. And interesting niches for smaller MSPs to figure out where they're going to fit, because the big guys definitely can't do it all.
No. I mean, I've probably said it 1,000 times in the last 20 years, Steve. I'm sure you've heard many people echo the same sentiments. Every time a national provider comes in or a big name company who's just trying to take managed services and bring it downstream, take a Dell or a telco, Verizon or something like that. Like we kind of were like, oh, that's not going to end well, right? Like for some reason the regional model doesn't work well in a national way. That doesn't mean that people aren't trying.
I think the interesting thing there, George, is like we work mostly with small businesses, right? anywhere from mom and pop one man shows on up to 100 employees. But really our sweet spot is 20 to 50 employees.
That's fair.
And I say all the time, maybe 10 to 50 in fairness. And I say all the time, larger companies, multinational or national companies, can't compete with us on the relationship side, on building relationships and working those relationships and building a level of trust with clients. The flip side is we can't compete with them on doing business the way they do business, nor should we try. And I think that's the part that most people, they try and do everything the big guys are doing. And well, if you're doing the same thing someone with a lot more money is doing, you're probably going to fail at it.
I mean, I remember the first time everybody tried to do hardware as a service out of their own bank account. That didn't work out so well.
Exactly.
I remember the first time everybody tried to go 24/7 on their own. That didn't work out so well either. A lot of companies spawned up as a result of just those two things, actually.
Right.
I think now everybody is like inundated with security, like in every font, format, bold, underlined, underscored way. I highly recommend people don't try that on their own, quite frankly, because there's just too much going on. But I'm sure some people are trying as well. I don't know. I feel like this industry has been miscategorized 1,000 ways. You know, at the end of the day, when you're talking about, to your point, 100 and below, you know, you're a little bit of a little mini distributor. You're a little bit of a little mini vendor manager. You're a little bit of a mini, like advisor consultant. And when you smack those three categories together, that's like 40 or 50 things that you have to deal with on a regular basis. It's a lot.
Well, and everyone tries to be all things to every customer, right? Instead of partnering. I mean, we're here with Chris because of the cybersecurity side and a partnership we've had in place now for years.
Yeah. Hi, Chris.
Hi, good afternoon.
I could go if I wanted to. I could take the 320 events that are about to be posted to our calendar and just concentrate on the cyber focused ones. I believe that's probably going to take me to 45% of them. Is that a surprise to you?
No, I think even it's interesting. I think the events that used to not really be, tagged onto a cybersecurity or a bolt on with cybersecurity have at the very least bolted on cybersecurity, right? So, but the events that are almost exclusively tied to a cybersecurity, event from an education standpoint, I think it's going to dominate what we're going to see in 2024. And I think to the point about, the larger companies and competing with larger solution providers. But the reality is, even the little smallest micro SMB solution provider has to take ownership of their own cybersecurity posture. And I think that's one of the most difficult pieces of this is taking ownership and responsibility, recognizing your own limitations, and be willing to ask for help, which to your point, you can't mash all those things together and expect to do them all well unless you rely on others to help support those endeavors.
Oh, I mean, shoemakers, it's old shoemakers paradigm, right? Like they're always fixing everybody else's shoes, never fixing their own. It's old school.
Yeah, and I think you shouldn't be selling shoes at this point in the game if you don't have the posture to go with it, because there's no forgiveness on failure with cybersecurity.
Well, yeah.
Well,
the end result is either a lawsuit, an insurance claim, maybe
yeah.
both. Maybe you don't make it through those. I don't know, but it just seems.
But you don't want to find out.
No, I mean, listen, it's America. Anybody can sue for anything. Let's be honest.
That's fair statement.
That being said, I feel like if I go, I'm a reverse waterfall guy, right? I like to always go to like the worst case scenario and work backwards, right? How do we prevent this situation?
Sure.
I mean, when you end up in front of, people who don't understand technology in general, let alone the very specificness of cybersecurity, and you end up in a court related situation between the judge or if you're in a jury trial, the people who they bring off the street to plug into the box, I don't think these people understand 1% of what's going to be discussed in that situation.
Yeah, that's fair. I think the challenge, and I think this is why you're seeing a lot of, to your point about the 45% and potentially even higher than that, just depending on as 24 unfolds and more events are added that we haven't even had the opportunity to consider. I think it's that the conversations have changed. So if you go back a year or even 2 or 3 years, there's a lot of acronyms that I think the SMB solution provider space couldn't have spelled for any of us. And I don't know that there was a huge necessity in the way that they're being seen today to use those tools. So like risk management, understanding compliance, understanding risk, and nobody wants to talk about risk really. At the end of the day, that's just not something we'll talk about any subject, but that one. And I think that that's changing, and I think clients are bringing that conversation to the table, even when the solution provider doesn't. The insurance providers are bringing that conversation to their clients and to their vendors.
I mean, yeah, I'm going to pause you right there. Let's say you're in an industry that doesn't really have a heavy compliance lane, right? And there are several.
Sure. Or yeah, definitely several.
What usually starts the conversation, at least on an annual basis, is either they have no insurance at all from a cyber standpoint, or their renewal document comes in where they have to start asking questions and answering them, and all of a sudden that brings up a boatload of things that usually end up in, well, either I'm going to pay you or I'm going to pay them, so why pay both? And like all of a sudden you get into this dollar and cents conversation that the novice business person when it comes to technology is like, I'll take my chances. That usually ends badly, but still doesn't mean it's not happening.
I'm not sure that's an unfair statement either. Like, I'm not sure if I was an SMB looking through that lens that I wouldn't make a similar decision without all the data, right? Like, if I don't understand all the pieces, I'm going to probably lean the way you just described.
Yeah, there are actually insurance brokers out there now advising smaller MSPs, you'd be better off without any cyber coverage.
Right.
Which is interesting, but the point is you can't afford as much as you should get, so you'd be better off not having any.
Or that's the illusion that is being created through the guidance that's being given.
That's a fair point. Chris, that's no different than us as an industry, that where every vendor out there is saying, hey, if you just have this in place, you'll be covered. And really, there's no solution out there that covers us.
I go to as small as the donut shop. Like they have a point of sale system. Maybe they have a wireless in there, camera system. Like there's not, printer in the back. There's not a lot. You know what I'm saying? Like you go in as an MSP to that small of an entity, I'm not sure they subscribe to what you're selling, right? They're like, I'm gonna make donuts as long as my is transacting. Don't talk to me. Yeah.
And I think that's a gap in the education piece, because the reality is that same organization is probably say things like, I don't care, I have nothing to lose, my data is not that important, until you take it away from them and make it inaccessible, right? If they can't get to it anymore, now how important is it? Now, all those things that solution provider has said up until this point, why didn't you tell me? I assumed you were doing that. It doesn't matter how we skin this, right? Like it's going to be the blame game. And that's the scary part, is the micro SMB space is the net new space, right? Like there's not a lot of 50 plus SMBs to go after as a solution provider. Like, yep, got another one. This was a good day. This was a good month. I got 4. No, it's these new, chiropractors and dental offices and a lot of these smaller organizations, mom and pops donut shops that truly need IT services, where 5-10 years ago, they didn't have a lot of digital footprint. An analog cash register you can't really service that remotely.
Well, and here's the thing. Every entrepreneur out there is looking to do more, is to grow, right? So you take your mom and pop donut shop, and while it's one shop, they probably can live fine without most of the technology, right? They can go old school and have a cigar box to put cash in and stop taking credit cards. Although I don't know how you survive today without credit cards, right? And do that. But all of a sudden, open two more shops and have 3, and now your ordering of supplies changes, your monitoring of business changes, your staffing needs in 3 locations change. It used to be you and your family took care of everything in the one shop, right? And suddenly the use of technology to watch over everything and the need for it all changes.
That's fair. I mean, at the end of the day, I disagree with you, Chris, on the point that there are a lot of businesses out there that do not have an external IT resource.
Oh,
Uh,
fair. I
I mean,
100% get that.
this, yeah, the concept that, well, everybody that has an MSP that needs an MSP already has an MSP, and like the only way you're going to grow your business if you're taking business away from another MSP. I don't subscribe. I think there's a lot of businesses out there that are just getting by, doing it, kind of duct tape bubble gum. We add when we need. They rely on some third party vendors to just sell them stuff,
Sure.
one time, or they go good old fashioned Best Buy. And like, no offense, they can get by for a while that way until they hit
Yeah.
a critical mass. I think there's a
Well,
lot.
they get by based on one semi-knowledgeable employee
Yeah.
that's there for a period of time until they're not, or until they realize they're not really as knowledgeable as they thought they were. They were just more knowledgeable than me, right?
And like, to the point of, you made a comment, I'm sure, about just the general small business owner or entrepreneur, but I would say, Steve, because again, you talk to a lot of MSPs, coach a lot of MSPs. Sometimes less is more, right? Like, if you do too many things for too many people, when do you actually get proficient at anything?
I would
Maybe.
rather be the quarterback outsourcing where I need to and being the focal point of all those connections, right? Than be the team owner having to provide it all, if you think about it.
I agree 1,000%. And, to both of your points, let's kind of needle this back to a point that Steve made at the beginning of the call. Hey, if M&A is top of mind for a lot of businesses, maybe the owner is getting to an age where they're like, hey, there's an exit in my future, right? Or I'm getting to a certain point where there isn't another person behind me to run the business if I want to step out. So I am planning on selling, or whatever the scenario. Maybe it's just the offer's too good and like I can't refuse it, right? Good old Godfather edition. Let me feed both of those pieces back to it. If your internal security posture is bad, your deal may not happen.
That
No?
is correct. Well, your deal might happen, but not at the price point you would like it to, right?
So like, you work for 15, 20, 30 years, you think you have this investment that you've been building, and then you find out that the rug got pulled out from underneath you in the 11th hour. That's a bad time to learn that problem.
It can definitely impact the valuation when the one doing the acquiring realizes that whatever they've gone after, CIS, the trust mark, something similar where they're being assessed by a third party and they acquire an entity that doesn't meet that security, minimums. All of a sudden it's like, okay, how do we get this up to par before, like, say, end of year? And they're like, well, we're gonna have to reduce the dollars we're paying you because you didn't do these 5, 10, 20 things.
And it's amazing that everybody's just their information flow coming to everybody you think should be the same. It's not. And
No.
it's so inconsistent across even our own little sub industry, or I call it sandbox, that people don't even understand those things. Really, in mass, I don't think it's genuinely understood that the sky is blue and green means go. I don't think when it comes to cybersecurity, it's that defined.
Well,
I think you're onto something.
it's such an immature industry when you really think about it, right? I mean,
Sure.
as an industry, if we stick to the PC side of things, right, we're less than 40 years old as an industry, as an entire industry, right? 1986. So right, we're coming up on that, right? If you
Okay.
think about that, how many industries touch literally everybody, right? Technology touches everybody. We're an industry that wasn't around 50 years ago, but today we touch absolutely everybody in every walk of life
That's
in one
fair.
way or another, right?
Well, and
Yeah.
all the industries that are now part of this digital footprint that, IoT and, we talk about the security breaches we're seeing with things like, water, critical infrastructure type stuff that, hey, that machine that they connect to the internet, it was built 50 years ago or longer. And now it has, what happens when I push red button? Well, we don't know because we're not there to see what happens when red button gets pushed. So someone that's now connected to it's like, hey, cool, I see red button. What happens if I just push it?
Yeah, they usually tell you not to press the red button unless like you're, the Staples easy button, but that's, a whole different angle. I mean, like, is there like it seems like a lot of people could say there is no end at that. There's no light at the end of this tunnel. It just keeps getting longer, longer, longer. Like, do we even get to a point where we feel like we have a reasonable handle of it? And they keep on getting messaging saying, no, there is no handle of this. It's just always going to drag you from behind.
You're talking about cybersecurity specifically?
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's two sides to this. One is that there is this preconceived notion that there is no hope because it just continuously gets worse. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's partially tied to the fact that we have a 24/7, 365 news cycle that's telling us, and we love to hear when bad things happen. That seems to be far more important than whether or not you plant flowers in your backyard. That's just not going to make the news, right? Like that's just not important enough to anybody. So you have that news cycle that I think is causing us to maybe have a false sense of no hope because of that. But I think the areas that we're seeing the largest amount of vulnerabilities now is largely tied to things that didn't used to have that level of scrutiny or were built with security first mindset, not there at all. IoT, some of the OT stuff coming into play. But I think from an industry standpoint, even from the consumer side, there's a maturity that's starting to happen, and it's starting to happen at a much more rapid rate than what we saw a couple of years ago. So I think there is hope. I think consumers are starting to recognize that maybe I shouldn't assume that the person on the other side really does want to give me a $50 Amazon gift card every time I get that email. But we have a lot of work ahead of us in the sense that those of us that are practitioners in the space have to educate at every opportunity that we have for those that are willing to listen. And if they're willing to listen, that means in theory, if you do a good job in educating them, they will share what they learned with somebody else.
No, I'm with you. I don't disagree with anything you just said. I just think that twofold, right? From Steve's angle, I can imagine there are a lot of people who are raising their hand saying, I've been doing this for a really long time. This cybersecurity stuff's just literally punching me in to the point where I don't know if I want to go along for this next part of the ride. Like I'm gonna tap out. Like it's just too much for me at this point. Like there's that.
I don't disagree with that at all. I mean, you're saying, I mean, CompTIA is rolling out emergency response team, that mental health type stuff that's causing that very, how do we cope with, I haven't slept in 6 months because I'm worried about fill in the blank. But the industry as a whole, I think, is starting to recognize that. And we're not just saying, hey, too bad for you, the shaming and the parading out in front of others to say because of their poor decisions, bad things happen. We're starting to say the opposite of that and saying, hey, what can we learn from the mistake that was made? Because we all make mistakes.
Okay, I like that. And then the other
Not
side,
only not
go
only
ahead.
that, but our clients are involved here, right? So we can be running things or making the perfect recommendations every time, but at the end of the day, it's a client's budget that comes into play.
Yes.
And
There's
unless as an entire industry we're going to refuse to service those that won't spend money on security recommendations, well, there's always going to be someone willing to pick up where you won't and to
no
do that
that's true.
business, right? And to slowly win over the client into trusting them and little by little get them to buy the same security solutions we might be failing at getting the client to buy, right? It's just
The
going to
costs
happen.
are coming down too. I mean, we talked about the small solution provider from the beginning of this call.
Mm-hmm.
We think about phone solutions. I remember back in the early 2000s, like, when suddenly you could actually stand up a phone system that says press one for sales, press two for tech. They were
Mm-hmm.
all the same person, but you at least created the illusion that they were right. But you could now afford those things because it wasn't $30,000 just to have the one box in your office. I think the same is true both from a tool standpoint and the service providers that are providing niche services into the spaces. I don't want to say like you can do all of it as a one person operation, but I don't think you're going to see a lot of MSPs growing past that 10 to 20 employee marker because at the end of the day, they don't necessarily have to. Now, they may get acquired and now it's an MSP that's 100 because they've got 4 acquisitions. But I mean, they're making a great, you know, hole in the ocean, or a hole in the damages being done by the threat actors by the way they're going about doing this and choosing to say, I can't do all of it. But today we have tools that allow for automation that just didn't work remotely well 5 years ago. It'll patch next round, right? Like, we've all been there, and
Yeah.
now those are less and less common problems to deal with.
Well, but there is a little bit of tool fatigue too, right, Chris? I mean,
Fair.
I mean, we could walk down every trade show floor on the planet and walk away with every credit card swipe that you can handle, and you will have the tools. Can you make them work? Can you monitor them? Can you actually functionally use these tools? Like, you get to the point where like the tools are running you. You're not running the tool.
Well, and they're stepping all over each other. And do we
Yeah.
train? Is there enough training for our people? Well, the vendor that's selling them to you, they're learning it as they deliver it to you. And yet we're counting on them to educate us, right?
Mm-hmm. No, I
But
mean,
today we have okay tools that solve problems for what's the affordability for, say, a small, that's a starting point,
mm-hmm.
versus I have a budget for what an enterprise is doing at the six figures for their tool that's been around for 10, 15 years. I think you're right. There is definitely tool overload, tool fatigue. But I think what's really slick about what we're seeing today at these shows is that they're, quite honestly, is now a tool for everyone.
No, as everything goes, right? You can buy a car at every level, right? You don't need the electric car today, right? You can still get away with the low cost used gas car that gets you where you need to go. And like, that's what
That
you can
has
afford.
more tech than you need.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
got you. I mean, at the end of the day, here's the problem. There's a lot of problems, but at the center
Yeah,
of
just
all,
one.
but at the center of all of this is, expectation versus reality, right? Like, if the person who is in the chair of the IT service provider, sells the world and can't live up to that pitch, it's no different than the MSP buying from their vendor. Hey, you sold me the single pane of glass marketing pitch, and like, I was with you for a decade. I never saw it. What they like, this dream never came true. The same can
Sure.
happen on the end customer, right? They just, like, they say, hey, one stop shop, call me for anything. If it has a blinking light, it's my job. Like, the reality is, if you take on too much, you promise too much, you can very much underdeliver.
Well, I think the big thing is, Chris said it earlier, if you don't have an understanding of the security posture of your own organization,
Mm-hmm.
then you have no basis for making buying decisions on all these tools. And you simply buy into some salesman explained to me that there's a hole in my security that I'm offering my clients that I never heard of, never imagined existed, really have no time to confirm. But man, they were pretty believable. So I got to buy that solution. And the
I
truth
mean,
is, there
yeah,
probably is a small gap somewhere, but they're really overlapping most of the tools you already have in place.
like think about it this way, right? I'm in Philly, my poor Eagles, but I'm in Philly, and I listen. Comcast is headquartered here in Philadelphia. If you didn't know that, I listen to sports radio a lot. Comcast commercials come. They're like, "Oh, Comcast Security Edge now available with all bit," and I'm like, do they even like, what do you buy? What do you get with Comcast Security Edge? And like, as an IT service provider, when you go in, they're like, "Oh, Comcast took care of me. I'm good." And you're like, "What does that mean?" Like,
Yeah.
that's the thing.
It means there's a firewall in place, right? That's what it
Yeah,
means.
like that. They think, hey, I already bought everything I needed. Comcast told me I'm good to go. They gave me a certificate. I'm happy. I'm good.
Yep.
Need anything
Funny
else?
you bring up Comcast in recent news cycles.
Uh-oh. Did I miss something?
Yeah, Comcast got hit. Was it yesterday or the day before? So
Uh-oh. Really?
yeah, you may have already gotten an email letting you know you
Uh,
should change your password to your
oh,
Comcast account.
oh. So the Comcast Security Edge guys have their own problems. Okay.
Shocking.
I mean, the threat actors are not really discriminating on who they target. They're just seeing targets that are reasonable acts. How far away is it? How close is it? Well, if it's close enough that I can hit the broadside of a barn, I'm going to try to attack it.
And like, all right, let me flip it around the other way, right? If you're, if you, is the word penetration testing too broadly used? Like, how often can I get somebody to look at my stuff from the outside world and tell me, hey, you're not, like, putting a billboard up, come hit me, right? Sticker on the back of,
Yeah.
your shirt, kick me in the ass, right? So, like, I feel like this concept is being watered down a little bit. And is it affordable to the small business?
That is a very, very loaded question. So I think there's two sides to this. One is the what can I do that does not require spending money? And I'm not saying that you're going to get out of spending money completely, but largely, if good cyber hygiene was being done across the board, there's 90% or more of what would be considered a threat actor's, playground, right? So if we can make it harder so that the low-hanging fruit for the bad guys is more and more difficult, the branches are now higher and higher up, well, that's going to change, that'll largely impact who they're targeting because, well, it's not easy. Well, then it's expensive. And usually if it's expensive, they're going to go find something that is, well, easy. So there's that piece. And then the other side of it, to your point about buying tools or trying to convince someone that they need certain things. I think the reality is it's all going to be tied to risk. And you brought this up before, like the donut shop. Yeah. Do I think they need, IDS and IPS and just the moon of cybersecurity controls? No, I think they need very specific things that are very scalpel almost in the way in which they're deployed. And I think that's one of the challenges that solution providers have is going like, hey, here's my 100 clients, and I'm going to blanket them with the same security across the board because to me that's an easier approach than saying you get some things and you get different things. But the reality is clients are snowflakes, and if you're dealing in different verticals and different business types, I don't think a one size fits all model is going to work in that scenario.
Okay. Now I'm with you. So coming back to the chair of the IT services provider, obviously everybody has customers of different sizes, different types, different verticals. To your point, as much as we try and standardize stuff, there's always going to be that customer who just, hey, I don't need this. I'll sign whatever you want. I'm going to keep
Yeah.
going and move on. Like, I think the messaging to the service provider is, hey, if your customer is not willing to do the things that you need them to do to cover both of you, then you need to drop them and move on. Do you still subscribe to that messaging, or is that not true?
Whether I subscribe to the messaging or not, it is true.
Okay.
However, ignorance and negligence is not bliss. So if you're still willing from a risk standpoint to keep them as a client, despite what they may be signing that says, I'm not going to hold you liable, it's a very slippery slope and a tough one to navigate, I think, to maintain that healthy infrastructure. But the flip
Here's the
side of that,
challenge.
go
Go
for
ahead,
it,
Chris.
Steve.
No,
No,
go
go
ahead,
ahead,
Chris.
Steve. No, I think I covered most of it. I mean, I could always add the little sprinkles, but go
Well,
ahead,
I
Steve.
think I think that hold harmless document that so many people hide behind is sure your client may actually agree not to hold you responsible. What about their insurance company? They're not going to agree. So my client has a breach or a security incident. Let's not call it a breach, right? And what do? They turn to us to try and explain it. They turn to their insurance company to pay for whatever losses, right? Their insurance company is now going to look at who? Us. They certainly have not signed off that they agree that we are not liable for not providing the services that their client said they didn't want to pay for, right? And whether
Yeah.
we win or lose, we still
We have
have
a
to deal
stack of
with it.
paperwork that's signed. I'd say that's a hard argument to make, but
Right.
because
Yeah,
they definitely have way more lawyers than every MSP I've run into, for sure.
right.
Yeah. And like, by the way, the lawyers are getting paid no matter what, right? They like to drag things out forever.
They're loving this world we live in.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, to your point, it's probably good for business.
Yep.
Actually, it's very good for business. Um, Chris, from obviously representing CompTIA, uh, real quick, right? I know a lot of people don't even understand what the Trustmark program is and like all this stuff. You guys have created a lot of resources in the last 2 years, 3 years that I think a lot of people don't even know exist. So if you could, give us a 30,000 foot, that would be great.
Sure. So I think solution providers is really the gist of the current trust mark, and that is we're in an industry that's largely unregulated, particularly in the United States. And so when we relaunched to pursue the security trust mark through CompTIA, it was let's build something that's unique to solution providers that shows through independent third-party assessment and verification that the solution provider is doing what is necessary to show a maturity and a posture from a cybersecurity standpoint, and then get a global recognition and draw for that. Because you go into the UK, European Union, Cyber Canada has Canada has the Cyber Canada program. They all have programs that are actually regulated requirements for solution providers, and yet we do not. And part of the reason for that is if you look at like UK and some of the European countries, their GDP in the SMB space is in the high 90s from a percentile standpoint, and in the US it's below 50%. So we're not quite that same level of urgency. That being said, individual states are starting to ask in the US for this type of like, how do we make sure that the IT services being provided into state and local government is meeting certain criteria? So raise the bar. And I think what you'll find with regards to the trust mark is that we're not reinventing the wheel. We took best practices for solution providers and we extracted them out of existing frameworks. So largely CIS and then a sampling from different frameworks. And the reason for going beyond CIS, because CIS kind of feels like it's written for solution providers anyways, was governance. So adding in that governance, just enough governance for a solution provider to say, I have leadership in my organization that's recognizing that we need to do this. We're all on the same page. We're all rowing together to go and effectively implement what are largely prescriptive security safeguards. That's the trust mark.
Okay. And like, I assume this isn't a 30-day project here, right? This is a long, there's a time investment here over more than a little bit of window.
Yeah, so out of beta, so the actual trust mark has been alive and in pilot since December of 22. We went live with beyond the beta group in April of this year. So from April to now, we have 2 MSPs being assessed on their evidence collected, and we have about another 10 to 15 of our 150 that are actively in the program. That will probably be sometime January, February. So when you look at the overall, we had about 1,000 on the wait list, and the current posture and where we're going at this rate, I think, yes, to your point, more than 30 days, but not forever. So on average, those that are putting the time in, it's about 2 to 5 hours a week is what we're getting back from a lot of the participants. So a 90-day to 6 months is realistically, if you put the time in, you can get this done and be in a spot to be assessed. And the funny thing is, some are like, well, 6 months or 90 days and then more. Well, if you are filling out and answering a safeguard and it says you have to have 90 days of reporting, but you don't have that in place already, well, you can't really satisfy the safeguard until 90 days has passed. So that's not necessarily a heavy lift. You go turn on extend the reporting period in 90 days, and now you kind of have to wait.
Yeah, no, I get it. That's great that you have that many people in the pipeline, by the way. I had no clue. That's great that we have a number. Probably means that anybody net new that wants to do this is probably going to be standing in line for a little bit.
No, so we went through the line pretty quickly there because we went in from Labor Day on. So I have gone through the wait list. So if someone joins the wait list right now, they'll usually get an invite to participate inside of 30 days. And right now I think it's inside of 2 weeks. And that's starting to become more and more automated as we scale the program, because the last thing I want is anybody on a wait list to get started in the trust mark.
Fair enough. I
Hey,
love it.
Chris, is there anything companies can do to get ready for the trust mark?
It's a great question. So there's 120, I think it's 123 safeguards from CIS. So if I was to make this easy, if you're going on the path of like, hey, I want to improve my posture, targeting CIS as a starting point would be great, because that's roughly 2/3 of the total safeguards in the trust mark. That's where I would start. I'm not going to say that no to other frameworks being helpful, like if you're doing CMMC or the 800-171, you're already on that program. I'm not telling you to drop doing that, go do CIS, not at all. I really think any security framework, NIST, CSF, some of the others, those are all a good place if you have the desire to pursue those, because they are helping you think through things like, oh, I'm going to need policies. Oh, I need to show evidence on how we meet this safeguard. I would even say that if you're going through SOC 2, I don't want to tell you that that's good or bad, because the exercise of doing any framework is going to help you be better prepared for pursuing the trust mark.
Okay. Some of these things are not are not small initiatives, right? I mean,
No.
you threw a lot of frameworks out there, and even SOC 2, right? Like I've talked to a lot of companies that have spent a lot of money to get through a SOC 2.
Yes. And so that's, that comes up a lot, like how much is the trust mark? Well, it's $2,500 to be assessed annually. So while it's not, say, free, it's not in the SOC pricing and some of the others that are out there. But again, no one wants to do this by themselves. So if we look at real costs to pursue any framework, whether it's regulated or not, it's not something you want to do by yourself. And that's one of the things that we're trying to really instill with the trust mark is to say, hey, everybody that's participating in this program, that's somebody that you can lean on and say, hey, I ran into this challenge. Can you help me solve this safeguard? Or what it was your answer? How did you answer it? Like, I don't care if you're looking at your neighbor's notes, right? Like, because the reality is if you decide to implement what your neighbor's doing, it's probably going to raise the bar.
Okay. I'm down. I hear what you're saying. Steve, I think a lot of MSPs, if you looked at all the people that you're currently working with right now, how many of those? 100? I don't know.
Roughly 100 MSPs. Yep.
Okay. How many of those people really have this? Like they're really confident the security thing's figured out of the 100?
Well, here's the thing.
Figured out.
Figured out is a
Have
never.
under control, have a
I
plan.
I
I
don't know
Yeah.
that we ever get there, but that's part of what we teach. So
Yeah.
we started something called Secure Outcomes. Help me, Chris. At least 4 years ago now.
It
Three
was
to
right. It was right during right before the pandemic, and then
yeah.
obviously
So
the pandemic, we had nothing to do, so we really started working on that.
and Secure Outcomes. It's that journey of let's look at the CIS controls one at a time, and let's attack them in a collaborative way, a group of people together doing it at all at different stages, doing it so that when the trust mark came out, it was, hey, this is a natural. Let's go work on the trust mark now because we were already there, right? Even before CompTIA relaunched the trust mark, we were already saying, hey, security has to be an everyday thing, not a let's check a box and say we're done now type of thing. So we've been working on it for a while. But to your point, George, 25% of our membership are focused on this, right?
I would say if you looked at, again, everybody has a different number, right? If we just let's even narrow it down to forget worldwide, North America, number of MSPs, right? I don't know, 75,000,
Sure.
95,000, pick a
There's a
number.
lot.
Um, if I'd say Steve's group, again, it's sample size, probably way ahead of where the rest of the grouping is percentage wise.
And our group is low. I look at ours and say it's low. Imagine, right? That maybe we're double the total US market. And that means only 10% are focused on this. And they're out there waving the same banners and flags as everybody else. We're your IT service provider and we'll take care of you.
And I think that's the scary part, right? Is that we're saying we're doing better than, and our percentage numbers are still in the 10%, right? Like, that's the part that scares me every day. We talk about this on cyber programs is, how do we get more solution providers to become engaged in cybersecurity programs? Because if you're engaged, you're at least open to the idea that you can improve your own posture. And if we can get you open to the idea, I think we can start influencing the change.
Well,
Okay.
again, though, the economics are against that, right? The
Sure.
the vendor community, right, is doing their job. They come out with a solution, they perfect the solution to the best of their ability, or at least work towards it, and then they need to sell it to continue on that journey because they need money. They're not doing anything wrong. They're doing business. It's the same as the rest of us, right? But they are now pitching this solution is needed. And they're
Wow.
pitching it to an uneducated market of MSPs or IT service providers who are going, hey, these guys said it's needed. We better get it because we're conditioned to do what's easy. Let me just buy something else and charge my client for it. And therefore, done. We can put something up on the wall that says we're cybersecurity focused, right?
To that degree, the Chris's of the world, the Matt Lees of the world, there's a lot of people in
Right.
security land that have been screaming from every mountaintop that they can. that the vendor also doesn't like. Microsoft's a great example. Like, how long did they go saying, "Oh yeah, MFA is there. You can turn it on. We encourage you to turn it on. You should turn it on, but we're not going to turn that on by default."
Right.
Why would you deliver a solution that isn't already like the low hanging fruit should just be already done?
Right.
And
I
that's where
totally
regulation is coming, I think, to really say secure by design, secure by default. No more excuses as to how you're going to alienate the customers that don't understand what that means to have to do a little bit extra effort to log into a system. Um, especially in America, we're convenience driven, right? If I can't have it right now, do I even want it at all?
100% right. Here, the problem is that, like, I think the MSP, back to the number of vendors that they have to manage behind them, if they went back and just started going back to their vendors saying, "Hey, like, how do I turn on the security defaults?"
Yeah.
The response is going to be, "Oh, well, you have to go and create those on your own. We don't actually have defaults. Like, our defaults are whatever you want them to be." That's going to be the generic answer back on a lot of those.
Well, to your point, like anybody can go and buy something from Microsoft. That doesn't mean they should. That doesn't mean they should even be allowed to.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the things that we still have to change, right? Like, hey, I don't need to go through an MSP. I know how to run my credit card. I can do this just
Yep.
fine. Don't need your help. That's part of what actually has to be changed, because it's interesting when you think about from a consumer standpoint, how many consumers at this point in time don't have MFA on their bank account to log in to do online bill pay? The banking industry is and I think quickly going down because the banking world is recognizing that they're at risk for
Mm-hmm.
the, for lack of a
Exactly.
better word, the idiot that says, I don't know how all the money out of my bank account was taken. I only clicked on the link for the Amazon rewards card, and last week I got one and I got the $45 or $50 card, right? So but in the consumer space where we're responsible for ourselves and our families, we're far more likely to take cybersecurity seriously than when we go to work and say, oh no, we got someone else that's responsible for that.
That's fair. I mean, I'll tell you this. You'd be surprised how many people have PayPal, Venmo, Cash App, whatever, all those ones, right? There's a whole category of them. Right now, if you go create a PayPal account, you still have to go and specifically turn on MFA. Like, they don't force you to turn it
Right.
off.
But the consumerism side of things like Venmo is I can look up, George, and if I think that that's George and the number I think matches, I can send you money on Venmo. You might not even have a Venmo account and it might not be you. That is a pretty common occurrence from what I'm seeing today that, wait,
Yep.
before you send me money, I'm just going to ask that you just double check with me and make sure that it really is me that you're sending money to. I would hate for you to send it to somebody else.
That's a very fair. I don't think most people ask that, but let's be honest.
No.
It's when they find
No.
out after the fact that their money's gone.
Right.
Well, for that matter, the IRS call or the Microsoft support call, or we could go on and on, right?
Yeah, I'm paying taxes on money I didn't get. That would be real fun.
Yeah, that is interesting. Hey, you got an IRS notice saying that you didn't get
Right.
the money that somebody collected in your name. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
awesome.
Yep.
Can you imagine that? Now you got a whole different set of problems.
I'm sure it's already happening.
Wow. That's definitely a takeaway from this session, right? I mean,
Now I'm gonna
somebody
go
stole your
cry.
identity, took
Yeah.
money out, and then basically now you're stuck with a 1099 in your name floating out there. Somebody came
Right.
to collect money. Wow.
That's right.
Okay. That's
This went
crazy.
sideways real quick.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, here's the thing. I agree with you that the awareness part is tricky. I believe the more people know, the more people will engage. I think probably you guys agree with these things. How you get that messaging standard, I think, is a time problem.
Sure.
I think that as more and more people get hooked in, and as more of these security specific things occur, and more people learn, that aptitude and that percentage of people that understand goes up over time. Um, or as to your point, bad news travels faster than good news,
Yeah.
and really good people get hurt in a really bad way, and all of a sudden everyone's like, "Uh-oh, I don't want to go down that way."
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if there's an in between.
Well,
I
and
think
here's
it's
to your point, George, we react in fear when something happens, but that fear does not carry us forever.
No,
Carries us for a period of time and we focus on it, and then we go and focus on something else again, right? And that's the challenge with this whole market when it comes to cybersecurity.
Yeah.
We want 100%.
Right.
We,
Yes.
we want we want like, so if I put this tool in, bad things aren't going to happen. Well, I can't guarantee that. Okay, well then I don't want it. And the reality is what we
Yeah.
should really be saying is we want to all be on the same page, is that when bad things do happen, can we reduce the amount of impact to you and your organization and your family? Because if we can, then that actually is making a difference, right? We don't have to. Yeah, you're right, you can't afford the 100% tool, and it also doesn't exist, but you can afford this one that reduces the probability by whatever the percentage is. And if you can tie that percentage to dollars, now we're speaking their language.
Yeah. No, I agree. And like, if that's the type of stuff that you guys are putting out, that's good. That's a good workshopping session. Because quite frankly, making this English and making this presentable downstream to the end customer is probably the hardest part of the whole thing, in my opinion.
Agreed. 100% agreed.
Yeah. Like the donut shop guy might be lost, but the guy next door to him might not be. You know, like,
Right.
so I think the easier that this can be boiled down into presentable items, I think the higher chance of success. And back to the point that I made earlier, Steve, right? Like at some point, every service provider has to answer the question: do I have good customers? Am I profitable on these customers? If I do sell my business, because if M&A is the top thing still being talked about, is my book of business good?
Right.
Is it viable for somebody else to give me what I want out of it? These are all important questions to be asked.
It's interesting that I haven't seen a business valuation where cybersecurity is a factor.
Really?
But as we're talking about it, it has to be,
Yeah, absolutely
right?
right.
It has to be.
It actually comes up quite a bit when we talk about the trust mark. Is, yeah, so today got your ducks in order, and then you go acquire in the next year, between assessment windows, you acquire two companies. Well, you may no longer be able to meet the minimums because you just haven't done the ingestion to a level that says that new entity is fully onboarded, running the same security posture that we are.
However, to the point you make to me all the time, Chris, if you have an onboarding procedure that talks about the timeline for getting these new clients there, you may
Yep.
not be there yet, but if you're following that timeline and you're on point with that timeline, I would look at you differently and say, "Oh, you're always taking on new clients. You can't snap your fingers and make them compliant instantly. You have a plan in place for getting them to compliancy, and they're on point with that plan that you've laid out for
Continuous
them." Right?
continuous improvement.
Yeah.
No, I mean, listen, I haven't acquired any business recently. Don't intend to, but Steve, Chris, I'm sure you guys are involved somewhere in the mix of a lot of these transactions. Somebody that has a plan and is following a plan makes me feel a lot more comfortable from somebody who's about to give up cash than somebody who's like, you're just giving me a problem and I'm buying one, and then I'm in trouble once it's on the other side.
I like that statement. I think that M&As, in looking at it through the lens of, am I buying an opportunity or am I buying a problem?
Right. Well,
That's
and the truth is, if you're a buyer, right, you're looking at every problem as an opportunity, but you're telling the other party that it's a problem, right? I
oh
can't
yeah,
tell you as much because of all this.
Yeah.
However, in the background, you're going, man, my sales department and my cybersecurity people, they're chomping at the bit for this because this is opportunity, right?
yeah. I mean, like it has to be at a viable point where they can build off of it, or else it's just a complete. You're buying just junk. I mean,
Yeah.
at that point, it's not even worth buying, right? So, that's interesting. Yeah, like I'll keep that in mind. Next time I talk to you about this, I want to see how often this is brought up in the valuation process. In 2024, I gotta think it's only going to go up.
I can tell you, George, it just went into my valuation process as I said those words.
There it
Um,
is. See,
because
I
I don't
provide.
do it either. I don't do it either, right? In when I do valuations, I do not necessarily look at this, and I should.
Yeah.
You
No.
have the trust mark? Let's talk. I'm
Yeah.
interested.
Hey, I'm sure the trust mark list is now very coveted in that
That's
case.
right. Now it is. That's right.
There you go. You know, you're gonna have people calling you, Chris, and be like, "Where is that list? Is that online somewhere? Can I
And you
buy
have to a CompTIA member, they can look in the directory.
They're like, well, I'm going to sign up for a CompTIA membership now. I'm going to start
That's right.
scraping this.
Yeah.
Gentlemen,
Get a trust mark and increase the amount of people coming your way looking to buy you.
That's right.
I mean, based on this
Not a,
conversation, yeah, I think so.
yeah.
Chris, where can people find more information about the trust mark? And then Steve, I'll come to you about where people can find more information about MSP.
If you can literally just Google CompTIA Trustmark, CompTIA Cybersecurity Trustmark, and it's like the first one. If it says sponsored, I don't know that I'd click on that one, but yeah, it's right there. I would give you a URL, but it's far easier to just Google it. And that would be get signed up and we'll get a conversation right away.
Awesome. And then Steve, where do people find? I mean, obviously the website's right in your background, but find more information about what you're doing, how to get involved if they're interested in what MSP-Ignite's really good at.
Yep. Msp-Ignite in its heart is there to help MSPs improve their value, improve their standing in hitting their goals. We're a peer group company that is 100% vendor agnostic, not tied to anyone else's beliefs or consulting or anything else. We are really there to help our members grow. And yes, msp-ignite.com is where they can find out more.
Awesome. I'm really excited for 2024, guys. I really am. I think it's going to be, I feel like everybody and their mother has come out with some sort of event angle. But I think some of the event circuit after a couple of decades is finally starting to separate out a little bit. And I think people are starting to realize that, you know, I need something new, right? To make it worth my while to leave my office or my home office for that matter. So I'd be curious to see how, if we fast forward 12 months through 2024, how it all shakes out. But you know, I'm sure we'll be running into each other somewhere along the line. And thanks for hopping on today.
George,
really
one last thing, because I want to give kudos to MSP Initiative here. You know, you talked about the calendar and over 300 events. And, you know, I'm wondering how many of those events are vendor-driven events, right? They are a vendor event inviting their clients and prospects in. And the one thing you have done so well is that while you partner with sponsors, as we all need to make this world work we live in, the events that you're doing right now are purely educational. They are not sales pitches, right? And I love that, and I look forward to attending one this year.
No, I appreciate
As do
it.
I.
I really appreciate you saying that. I mean, listen, I'm not the only one out there saying, hey, you know, I don't want a sales pitch masked into the form of an educational event. I think we've all seen that 1,000 times.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, like, just like Chris is like, hey, we need to start somewhere and let it build, right? If can't do it overnight, like I'm another person out there that's raising my hand saying, well, then we need to action something or else it'll never be anything other than what it's been forever. And I'm not saying that the bigger events and the more established events that have been out there for a long, long time don't hold some value, but like at some point, the it needs to have some balance. That's the best way for me to say it, right? And like I get every vendor on the planet has a sales quota and they need to be able to hit a certain mark and all that. Totally understand it, really, really do. But if people don't take you seriously, then the whole thing breaks down and you'll never get there anyway. So I really think there's a lot of learning to be done, especially past the 100 level stuff. I think there's really cool, clever things that people don't even realize exist. And the more we can help each other get that type of stuff out there, I think the better off the entire community becomes. And back to Chris's point, you know, like let's rise all the boats anywhere we can. But the best way to do that is to learn real world, right? I can talk to you, professor, theory, you know, this is what it could be, should be, but the reality is always different. I want to hear the different. I want to hear the reality. That's how I've always learned. I know I'm a blunt force, stubborn Northeast guy, but I definitely take more value in somebody that's gotten beaten up to figure out how I don't get beaten up.
Sure. 100%.
Agreed.
That sounds like a pitch for peer groups, by the way, George. So I like that.
Hey, more than take it, use it, run with it. If anything works for you, run with it. Guys, this session was recorded. We're going to get this up on mspinitiative.com under sessions. Thank you for continuing to listen and watch these. Our goal is to not talk at you. I want you to hear different opinions from different parts of the sandbox. Chris, thank you for coming today. Steve, thank you for coming today. Hopefully I make it through the rest of the regular football season.
Hang in there, George. You'll be just fine.
Thanks,
Take
guys.
care.
Have a good one. See ya.